I feel so like scholarly with my iPad and um, yeah, and my notes for my video essay. But getting right back into things with part 2 of my video essay on the Virgin Sxicides by Virgin Sxicides, and just kicking things off with point number 3, which is for me to give an instance for each theme in the book, and just talking a little bit about what I like and what I dislike about how he handled each one. So the first one being longing. You see that this is probably the theme that's like front and foremost in my mind when I think of this book, because these boys, I mean, we're getting their perspective years after these girls have died. It's not like we're seeing them right at the time that this is happening. This book is a reflection. It's a compilation of reflections. And you can see that even years later, these grown men, once boys, but now grown men, are longing for these girls because they never really got the opportunity to know them. They could only ever watch them from afar. And I think that Virgin Sxicides did a wonderful job with this without making it unrealistic and stupid. I mean, maybe it is a little bit unrealistic, which would be probably my only dislike about it, is that these boys are reminiscing about these girls that they didn't know like decades after they're gone. I just don't think that people really operate that way. I think that happens if, let's say, you fell in love with someone and then they were like that one person that got away. It was like right person, wrong time kind of thing. And that kind of situation, you could see how someone could pine after someone that they actually knew, someone that they actually got to experience for decades on end, because they know what it was like to be around them, to know them, to talk to them, to experience them. Whereas with these boys, everything that they knew about these girls came from other people, came from hearsay, came from rumors, came from memories that are like decades old. So it's not really reliable because it is sort of glamorized, but at the same time it's not glamorized, this longing that these men have for the Lisbon girls. But I think he did a really good job with it, and that's the only thing I would say I dislike, is that they're like thinking about these girls decades later. It just doesn't seem realistic to me. And then the next theme, I think, was teenage angst. These boys are sad because they don't know these girls, but they want to. They can't touch these girls, but they want to. They can't be around these girls, but they want to. You know, they want some closeness to these girls, but they can't have it, and that makes them sad. And then also we experience the angst that the Lisbon sisters, particularly Lux, is feeling through a lot of her actions and a lot of the things that we see her do, and even through Cecilia, through the first Lisbon sister who ended up unaliving herself, I guess I'll say. That angst that you feel, one of the first things that Cecile says is, "You've never been a 13-year-old girl," in reply to a doctor asking her why would she ever want to end her life anyway. And I think that one line just sums up the book perfectly, because we're talking about these girls who don't have any friends, who people are scared to approach them. Their parents are very overbearing, very overprotective. They're very sheltered, which leads into the next theme that is written about and discussed in this book and analyzed in this book, which is isolation. These girls are isolated, and I think it's a very unique perspective you see, because we don't get the girls' actual experience. We get their experience as seen through the lens of these boys and what they know. So we don't really know. There's this element of mystery where we don't really know how bad whatever it was the girls were going through, because we never get to be in their heads. We never get this story from their perspective. We can only go off of the perspective of these boys and off of the perspective of these people who reflect on what it was like to know those girls. Trip Fontaine's memories of Lux, or his friends' memories from taking the other 4 sisters to homecoming so that Trip could take Lux, or her parents, whether it's their father reflecting on them and what it was like to lose them, or the mother's perspective, or the priest's perspective, or a teacher's perspective, whoever's perspective that we got throughout this book. We never know actually how the girls felt, which is why I think this book works, is because it's about the Lisbon girls, and it's about their isolation, and it's about their sadness and their teen angst, but it's through the lens of these boys, and that makes it more realistic for Jeffrey Eugenides to talk about. I think it was genius for him to write the book the way that he has, not only because it's very theatrical, very whimsical, but also because I don't think he would be able to write a story about 5 young women through the lens of 5 different young women. So I think it was very ingenious that he decided to do it in a way that he could comprehend it, in a way where it wouldn't come off as being like unbelievable or comical, or kind of like a mockery of what it would be like to be a woman during that time. And so another theme was obsession. And again, I don't think I need to talk too much about that one, because the whole book is about these boys fantasizing and fanboying and obsessing over these 5 sisters decades after their deaths, and reminiscing about them and whatever little pieces they had of these girls decades later. And so that's the obsession part. And then another theme was death, because obviously each one of these sisters dies, starting with the youngest, Cecilia, who tries to commit suicide, isn't successful, and then eventually tries again a couple weeks to a month after her initial attempt, and this time she actually goes through with it. And then the other sisters, who end up doing it because of the fact that Cecilia had started that sort of domino effect. That ties into the very last theme that I picked up, which was grief. We see how the Lisbon sisters dealt with the death and grieved over the death and the loss of Cecilia. We see them huddling up in their bedrooms and not bathing for days. We see them trying to protect the tree that Cecilia cared about. When it comes time for the environmental people to come and try to cut it down, they stand and they kind of guard the tree, and they don't allow them to cut it down. And this is all their way of dealing with it. And also their grief over not being able to be like regular teenage girls. We see Lux rebelling and sort of sneaking out of the house to rendezvous with different men. We see her losing her virginity to Trip. We see her coming home after curfew, and we see her drinking. We see her smoking, because really Lux is sort of the star of the show. And so, because she is described as like the pinnacle of the Lisbon sisters, she's described as being the most beautiful one. And so she's the one that we kind of see the most of, we hear the most about. So that leads me into point number 4, where I'm just going to talk about how I feel about the book as a whole. I think that this book was so good, and it just dawned on me. The reason this book works is because it's through the perspective of these boys. I think if Jeffrey Eugenides tried to write this through the minds, plural, of 5 teenage girls, I don't think it would have worked. At first, I thought it was icky, because I'm thinking, like, why does this grown man want to write this story of these 5 teenage girls, these like manic pixie dream girls? But it's not true. That's not what it is. When you go into this book and you read it, they're not manic pixie dream girls. They're normal teenage girls who live a sort of sheltered, isolated life. They aren't perfect. Even Lux, who is supposed to be the prettiest of the Lisbon girls, has her imperfections. Jeffrey Eugenides isn't afraid to kind of dive into what it's like living in a house full of women, how it can smell funny sometimes, and how it can be weird because girls are on their period, and it's just and they're being messy, and it's dysfunction, it's disorder, because not only are they teenage girls, but they're dealing with grief. And both of these parents are dealing with grief. And so things sort of come undone, and you see that these girls are not perfect. These girls aren't just little fey creatures walking around with shaved legs. I mean, it talks about them having crowded teeth. It talks about Bonnie being a little chubby. It talks about them having like little blonde mustaches. Lux is described as being an idiot, pretty much. Like, these girls are not perfect. Again, I think it works just because of the way that it's written. I think it's theatrical because you're watching this happen, you know? It was beautiful. It was this beautiful, sad story, like, where everything went wrong. And at the heart of this story, it's really about loneliness and isolation, I think, because that's how the Lisbon girls felt. That's how I imagine they felt. They felt lonely, and they felt misunderstood, and they felt isolated. And so those are my thoughts on Jeffrey Eugenides, the Virgin Sxicides, and I hope to see you again some other time on some other video. I hope you have a good day. I hope you have a good evening. I hope you read a good book, and I'll see you when I see you. Bye.